There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a restaurant table when someone asks the waiter if they can swap the $4 side salad for a plain napkin. Not a judgmental silence, not an angry one. Just a long, suspended pause where everyone at the table looks at their plates and quietly rearranges something inside themselves. You've probably met someone like this. Maybe you are someone like this. The person who calculates the gas money before agreeing to the road trip, who reuses aluminum foil with the tenderness most people reserve for antiques, who drives 11 miles across town to save 9 cents per gallon, burning $3 in fuel to reclaim 70 cents, and somehow doesn't see the irony. And yet, when you quietly check their LinkedIn, they're earning more than comfortable. They're doing fine, maybe better than fine. So the question isn't, can they afford it? The question is far more interesting than that. The question is, why does spending money feel like bleeding to them? Because here's what nobody talks about. Frugality, in its most extreme form, has very little to do with money. Money is just the stage. The real drama is happening somewhere much older, much deeper, in a part of the mind that doesn't read bank statements. And if you sit with that long enough, something starts to shift. You stop seeing the penny pincher as someone who's just cheap or uptight or exhausting to eat brunch with. You start seeing them as someone who is quietly, desperately trying to survive something, even if the danger passed years ago. Let's start at the root. There's a psychologist named Dr. Brad Klontz, a financial therapist who studies what he calls money scripts. These aren't things you consciously decide. They're not philosophies you adopt after reading a book on financial planning. Money scripts are installed. They're written into you during childhood, before you even understand what money is, before you have the language to interrogate the lessons being handed to you. Think of them as the emotional operating system your family ran on. And like any operating system, you don't choose it, you inherit it. You boot up with it already running. And unless something forces you to look under the hood, you live your entire adult life operating on software you never agreed to install. One of the most powerful scripts Klontz identified is what he calls money vigilance, the deep, bone-level belief that financial catastrophe is never more than one wrong decision away, that the floor could give way, that the safety net has holes you can't see yet, that spending money, any money, is essentially tempting the universe to punish you. People running this script don't experience a $4 side salad the way you do. They don't see a minor convenience. They see a small breach in the wall, a fracture. And the part of their brain wired for danger responds accordingly. A quiet alarm, a tightening in the chest, a voice that says, not yet, we can't afford to be careless.
Now, where does that script come from? The most obvious answer is scarcity. A childhood spent watching parents argue in hushed voices over utility bills. Lying awake as a kid, absorbing the specific tension that lives in a house where money is always just barely enough. Learning, without anyone ever sitting you down to explain it, that money is danger, that spending is reckless, that you must hold on, always hold on. This kind of upbringing leaves what psychologists sometimes call financial trauma, real embodied responses to money that behave identically to trauma in any other domain. Hypervigilance, avoidance, the body going into a low-level fight-or-flight response at the register, at the bill, at the sound of a credit card being declined 2 tables over. The brain files this experience under never again, in permanent marker underlined twice, and installs a surveillance system to make sure it never happens. Every spending decision becomes a potential threat assessment. Your nervous system becomes a security guard at the gate of your wallet, and it is extremely bad at knowing when the emergency is actually over. But here's where it gets strange, and this is the part that most people don't expect. Some of the most aggressively frugal people you will ever meet did not grow up poor. They grew up comfortable, or even wealthy, and yet they are reusing Ziploc bags until they disintegrate, calculating the exact electricity cost of running the dishwasher versus hand washing, feeling a physiological jolt of discomfort at full-priced anything. How? Because they inherited the anxiety without inheriting the memory that created it. Think about that for a moment. Their parents or their grandparents lived through real scarcity, a depression, an economic collapse, rebuilding from nothing after immigration, after loss, after some financial wound that left permanent scarring. And those people developed coping mechanisms that made complete sense in context: hypervigilance, extreme conservation, the refusal to waste even the smallest thing, because small things once meant survival. But then they raised children in stability, in comfort, in full refrigerators and warm houses. And yet, the nervous system is remarkably loyal. It passes down what it learned. Not in a memo, not in a family meeting. In the small daily behaviors the child absorbed before they knew they were learning anything. In the way a parent's shoulders tensed at a restaurant. In the quiet pride when something was repaired instead of replaced. In the almost religious reverence for a sale. The child grows up and never faces the original danger, but they carry the alarm. They feel the anxiety without understanding why. It's like, as someone once put it, developing post-traumatic stress from a war you didn't fight. You feel it in your body. You organize your behavior around it. You build your entire relationship with money around protecting yourself from something that, for you personally, may have never even happened. And your nervous system does not care about that distinction. It doesn't check your bank account before deciding whether to panic. It just knows that spending feels dangerous in a way you cannot quite name, cannot quite argue with, cannot quite explain to your partner when they ask why you drove to 3 different grocery stores to save $1.50 on olive oil.
There is another kind of extreme frugality, though, and it runs on completely different fuel. Dr. Sarah Newcomb, a researcher who studies the psychology of financial behavior, has documented something that sits at the intersection of money and control. And what she found is this: when the important things in life start to feel uncontrollable, when the relationship is uncertain, when the job feels fragile, when the future looks like a dark room you can't see across, people reach for the one thing they can control, and they hold on with both hands. Money becomes the last solid thing in a room full of fog. And so you grip it, tightly, obsessively, not because you are greedy or miserly or broken, but because somewhere beneath the surface, your mind has decided that this is the only lever you have left, the only domain where you still get to say yes or no, where your choices actually matter, where the outcome is still, at least partly, yours. This is why you'll encounter people who seem almost paradoxical in their spending. They refuse to pay for parking. A $4 parking fee sends them circling the block for 20 minutes, but they'll spend $2,000 on a vinyl record without flinching. They'll clip coupons with military precision and then lease a car that costs more than their rent. From the outside, it looks like inconsistency, maybe even hypocrisy, but what you're actually witnessing is a map of someone's emotional landscape. They are miserly in the places that give them a hit of control, that small, satisfying feeling of having chosen, having won, having said no when the world wanted them to say yes. And they spend freely in the places that feed something else entirely, something that feels like identity or beauty or belonging or joy. The money isn't the point. It never was. The money is just the currency of a much older transaction, one between a person and their anxiety, between a self and its need to feel safe, between a human being and their quiet, constant, exhausting attempt to make the world feel less threatening. And this is the thing that makes it so hard to recognize from the inside, because it doesn't feel like anxiety. It doesn't announce itself as fear. It feels like wisdom. It feels like discipline. It feels like you are simply the one person in the room who understands how precarious everything really is, while everyone else floats around spending money like the floor isn't actually made of glass.
You feel sharp, responsible, maybe even a little superior. And society agrees with you. Our culture rewards financial caution with language: frugal, disciplined, responsible, a good saver, financially savvy. There is no social mirror that holds up a reflection and says, wait, at what cost? What are you protecting yourself from? Is the danger still real? Other compulsions get named: gambling, compulsive spending, shopping addiction. These are visible. They have consequences that other people can see, and so they attract the concern and language they need. But the person eating ramen by candlelight to save on electricity, despite a healthy retirement account, is still being told they're doing great. Keep it up. Very sensible. No one thinks to ask what they might be running from. And maybe that is where we have to start. Not with the behavior itself, not with the split checks and the reused tea bags and the guilt-inducing pause before every purchase, but with the person underneath the behavior, the one who learned very early that the world is fragile, that safety is never guaranteed, that you hold on because letting go is unthinkable. Because here is the quiet cost that nobody counts. Extreme frugality doesn't just affect your wallet. It slowly, almost invisibly, erodes the warmth in your life. The friends who stop calling because every plan becomes a negotiation. The partner who starts to feel less like a companion and more like a financial threat. The family dinners that carry a low-grade tension nobody names out loud. You end up building a fortress so carefully that one day you look up and realize the fortress is empty, and you are inside it, alone, with a very impressive savings account, and no one to celebrate it with. The cruel irony is that the whole architecture was built for safety, and yet the loneliness it creates becomes its own kind of danger. But here is what I want you to hold. The behavior was never the enemy. It was a solution, a real, intelligent, deeply human solution to a pain that once had no other exit. Your nervous system did what nervous systems do. It protected you the only way it knew how. That deserves compassion, not contempt. Healing doesn't ask you to throw the budget away. It simply asks you to get curious, to sit with the question, am I choosing this, or is this old fear choosing for me? That one question, asked honestly, is where everything begins to loosen. You are allowed to feel safe now, not because the world has become predictable. It hasn't. But because you are no longer that child absorbing a storm they couldn't name. You have more tools now, more ground beneath you than it feels like. And if this story sat somewhere in your chest and wouldn't quite leave, if you recognize something in it, even something small, you are not alone in that. More people than you know are quietly carrying the same weight, wondering why security always feels one step further away than it should. If that's you, stay close. There's more of this kind of conversation waiting for you here.